Welcome to the Charlevoix Stories Project, which is a continuation of the Charlevoix Oral Traditions Project that was started, I believe, in 2007. Today is February 16th, 2016, and we're at the Charlevoix Public Library in Charlevoix, Michigan. I'm Mary Snyder, a volunteer with the project, and our videographer is Rick Pierpont of Pierpont Productions, located in Harbor Springs. We're delighted to be speaking with Carrie and Larry Minch. Carrie's parents were the Reverend Cohn and Marion Cohn, longtime Charlevoix people in the Congregational Church. Larry's father was Edward Minch,
Yes.
who was a member of the crew of the Sundew that went out in November of 1958 as a rescue and recovery mission for the Carl D. Bradley when it sank. And also, on a lighter note, Larry's a member of the 1958 Charlevoix High School football team that became the state Class C champions in football for that year. So Carrie, let's start with you talking a little bit about your dad, and if you would start with telling us something about his parents and his boyhood.
Okay. Well, my dad's father was one of 12 children, and his parents came over from Germany. And one of the children was buried at sea, died at sea. And my grandfather took up farming in the Thumb area, and the family farm is still in the hands of the Cohn family, fourth generation, I think. And my grandfather worked for the Buick Motor Company in Flint, and my grandmother was a very sincere Christian. You would find her on her knees by the washing machine when it was running, and singing hymns. So that my dad's background going into the ministry was a natural one in that regard. And actually, when he was a baby, just born actually, he was choking born at home. He was choking. And my grandmother managed to dislodge what was in his throat, and that she had prayed before he was born that he would be dedicated to God. And so he was sort of going to be a minister early on. And he actually would say to her, and when he could barely talk, "Mama es pay," and that meant let's pray.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, so.
So he was destined.
He was destined. Plus, my grandmother bore 9 children. Only 4 grew up, and some died in infancy of congenital issues. And my dad's little brother was 3 and died of scarlet fever. So he had this sense of life being short, and I better really use it well from the time he was tiny.
Well,
So.
he, if I remember right, graduated from Flint High School?
Flint Central High School.
And then he was really very active in college in various things, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He was the college tennis manager at North Central College in Naperville, Illinois. And he earned his college tuition in a large part through being the artist for their publications and their posters and all kinds of things that the college needed to have done. So.
What methods did he use for that artwork? Was he doing pen and ink then?
Well, I think it was pretty much pen and ink. He didn't know anything about watercoloring till till we lived in Chicago, and his neighbor taught him how to watercolor. There.
Also, I think in college, wasn't he the president of an art club?
Well, Maybe, I don't remember that.
You've been reading up on it?
He went into, he majored in psychology in college, but he was planning to go into the ministry and had to argue with the dean that psychology was a good thing to major in and being a minister, because that was considered, oh, that's way out there. Why would you want to major in that? No, you shouldn't. But he did. And he actually opted out of during his junior year. He could go directly into seminary and not take his senior year of college under a special program, and started into that in a church in Woodland, Michigan. His pastor died, an evangelical church. The pastor died, and the seminarians offered their students a chance to take that church right off the bat like that, and he did. So he commuted 400 miles every weekend to this little church. And
Now, were your parents married at that time?
Not when he was in Woodland, going to Woodland. They were not. They were married, they were married before he went to Marcellus, which is down near Three Rivers, little bitty town. They were married before that.
But I noticed your mom went to the same college.
That's where they met,
And so
yes.
did Dr. Bob and Lucy Martin from Charlotte.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, they were all there.
Classmates.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And my dad had my mom's older brother for his psychology prof, and that's how he knew him first. Yeah.
So then, when your dad got out of college, and he had served at, did you say Woodlawn?
He served at this little church at Woodland, not for a real long time, Woodland, Michigan. Actually, I think my mom's dad took over that church for a brief time. After that, my dad then took the church in Marcellus. He never graduated, got his BA until 1945, because he went back and got it after having that seminary thing go on, and then going to Woodland. So he finally got his degree in 1945.
Wasn't he called to Oak Park before he came to Charlotte?
He was. He was a couple places before that. He went from Marcellus to Norwood Park, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago, and he was asked to take a church that was just about ready to fall apart because of some disagreements between two different, very conservative and more liberal. And he managed to get that church, keep that church going, and and became acquainted with Vaughn Shoemaker, who was a cartoonist for the Chicago Daily News at that time, and who showed him a lot of things about religious and political cartooning and that sort of thing, which was kind of I've got some pictures that he did later after that. And he managed to get the congregation to be loving each other again, and that church I don't know what's happened to it now, but from there he was asked to take over the art director position at the Evangelical Church's publishing house, which is called the Otterbein Press in Dayton, Ohio. And so for 2 years he was the art director there, and he preached on the side a little at some area churches, but decided, I want to be a pastor. I don't want to be an art director. So then he went to Oak Park, Illinois then, yes. And then from Oak Park here. We were only there 2 years. We would have been there longer, probably, but they found he was allergic to city air. And the airport, he would get hives and his throat would close up.
Oh, all right.
And then he had to have a surgery, an abdominal surgery that he couldn't recover from. And they told him he had to take a month's sick leave. And that's when we ended up summering in Michigan and came, and the pastor of the Congregational Church in Lewiston, which was near where we were staying at his brother's cabin, my dad's brother's cabin, brought us up to Charlevoix because he said the Congregational Church up there has been without a pastor for several months. And so he decided to try out, because you tried out for the pulpit. Had to preach a sermon a couple different Sundays. And they said that clean air sweeping over 3 lakes is going to fix you up. And it did help, except the cause turned out to be brain tumors that was causing his headache, the headaches he was having. He fought a lot of health problems all along, all the time I was growing up.
I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
So he came to Charlevoix in 1952? About
October 1952. Mm-hmm.
All right. And at that time, was there a house that the church supplied for the minister to live in?
Yes, it was at 205 State Street, which is about where the parking lot is between the funeral home and the bank on the corner there.
All right.
It was, yes.
Do you remember living in that house?
Oh yes, I loved it. You came in the front door and there was a diagonal wall with a fireplace in it. We'd never had a fireplace. And it had all the bedrooms upstairs had all these sloping ceilings with little sliding doors that in this low area you could stick things, and it was a really fun house. And the church fixed it all up. My dad has always loved books. And in fact, we didn't have a car, so he could build a library up for years when we lived in the city and so on. And the church built bookcases. The whole living room, 2 walls of the living room were full of bookcases in that house. They added that for when we were coming. We still have a lot of those books.
Do you remember it being an easy transition for him when he came to Charlevoix?
Oh, he was.
A big city, didn't he? To come,
He left a big city, but he grew up in Mayville. It was a little town, and he was very outgoing, and he could, it didn't. I don't think it was. He loved it up here. He loved the woods. He was always wanting to be outside, tromping in the woods, and in fact, the property that we live in and the house that they built. He and Frank Bird, who owned a lot of property around, went out and looked at this 40 that Frank owned in January of '53. So we'd only been there maybe 3-4 months. And there was a brook on it, and he absolutely fell in love with that place. He grew up, my grandma's sister had a farm, and her husband, they farmed down in the thumb. It had a little stream on it, and he always loved that stream. So they bought that property and built 1 room on it the summer of '53.
1 room?
1 room. It's got windows going to the peak on both ends. It was a plan he'd found in a magazine and loved, and that's now the living room of the
Who
house.
was the builder?
Albert Novotny and Carl Purdy, Bill Purdy's dad.
Okay.
He was a cabinet maker, and Albert was a shipbuilder. So that place was built so tight that when you put a fire in the fireplace, you had to open the doors. Not enough draft otherwise. Yeah. And that was a kind of a retreat. We took the youth fellowship out there from church, and companies could stay there, and all kinds of things.
At an outhouse.
It had an outhouse, yes.
I was going to ask about that.
Yep, it had an outhouse. No plumbing.
Then you lived basically in the house provided by the church.
Yes, the
until
parsonage.
His ministry ended?
No. 1956, my folks bought this little cottage on what's now known as Raspberry Bay, where before you get to Pine Point, that John Schrader, the druggist, owned. It was very, very tiny little cottage, 100 feet of frontage on Lake Charlevoix, though, and they added on our kitchen and bedroom and study, and we lived there. Let's see. Well, I went off to college from there, and our little boys are seated on the sofa in that living room. So they left. They sold it. I think must have been in '64 when he had to retire because of his health. By that time, he'd had, the one brain surgery in 1955.
Sandy Fassett bought that house from him. He was a teacher.
That house burned down after sometime after Sandy got it. She'd left a coffee maker on when she left in the morning. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your dad's ministry here in Charlevoix and how that, all came together for him?
Well, he, I don't know what got him going writing the column, Nature Parables column, that he started writing for the Courier. I don't know what, I think he probably initiated it.
Did that come from his sermons?
Sometimes it would have something maybe from a sermon in it, but it was totally on the side of that. And one of the ways this church had dropped in attendance terribly while during the time period there was no pastor, and he would he had an ad in the paper every week with a sermon in it, title, and inviting people to come, and that would be at the end of his column. And the columns were always something about the natural world and just some religious connection. They were parables like Jesus wrote to illustrate something that he wanted you to know, to live by.
And weren't they all illustrated by him with pen and ink?
Yes, they were all pen and ink or brush and ink, mostly brush and ink.
Brush and ink?
India ink. Russian ink. In fact, this is the first book. It was a collection of the columns that were at that time, the title of the series was called Feeling Low, and these are the brush and ink drawings that were in, a lot of these he actually did during that sick leave before we moved up here, but these were
Did he do woodcuts also?
not woodcuts. He also used scratch board, which is a clay surface board. These are not scratch board. There are some in here that are scratch board. He did the brush and ink, and the scratch board you use poor books. The scratch board, you use a fine tool, and you've applied black India ink, and then you scratch through for the finer lines that you would see in these. He didn't do that initially. The first drawings in this book, I don't think there are any scratch board.
Was he all self-taught?
He didn't take art lessons. His brother tried to pay for art lessons for him, his older brother, but he didn't. He was always drawing, in fact, and got in trouble in high school, in German class and other classes, because he'd be drawing and the kids would be looking to see what he was doing. No, but he did learn watercoloring from a friend that lived across the street when we lived in Norwood.
He did some with chalk, too.
Yeah, he did chalk talks, that's right.
He also did a chalk sailboat, or sailing ship.
Oh, that's right.
Hung in his mother's living room. I remember as a kid when we used to visit.
Did he use just the white on black? Is that what he did?
No, they were
Colors.
colored chalk.
Colored
He did
chalk.
a sailing ship,
It was a gorgeous sailing ship.
and he also did sort of a winter scene. That was taken from a Christmas card that he did. But he learned to draw when he was recovering from, first off, a ruptured appendix when he was 8. And then he was sledding a year later, during that same year though, and he got hit by a car on his sled. His sled went out in the street and he dislocated his hip, and so he was laid up for a while, and he started drawing, looking at Christmas cards and drawing. And that's
It's a good thing your grandmother had a direct line to God. My friends have told me that it didn't matter what your father preached on, that every person who was in church that Sunday was able to take something away from that sermon. The little children could, the elderly could, the adults could. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
yes, I could agree with that.
Where did he get all of his ideas?
He read widely. He had a schedule. Actually, it's probably in here. He had a schedule of reading for the day. He had an income and an outgo schedule every day that he tried to abide by. And income, one of the income things was reading, and it says, first off, Bible, religion, philosophy, psychology, natural history, biography, literature, poetry, current events, and other reading. And he tried to read something, tried it almost every day to read something. And
But
all
not
of those
from
books.
each one of those categories. He
Well,
chose from a category?
I doubt that he read in every one every day, but he'd try to read in a range of things. He read, we got the New York Times, and we got the local papers, and and he was very interested in all those things, and he was a very interesting conversationalist. Anything you talked about, he had something to contribute.
But you had long dinner table conversations in the evening.
Oh, we did, and if I'd ask for it, I'd get a nature lesson. I had to ask for it.
A sidebar, he was also a good, big-time TV boxing fan. Loved to watch the fights on Friday night.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah.
Oh, he'd holler at him. It was
Very
incongruous, though, to me. I could never.
It doesn't seem to go with his personality. does it?
No.
Can you talk a little bit about his books and how he got started publishing?
Well, the first book came about from it just collected columns from the newspapers. They were in the Charlevoix Courier, all of these articles were, and one of the members of the church, Chuck Durr, knew how to approach publishing companies and helped him with that. And all of his books, all of the hardcover books were published by Erdman's in Grand Rapids, William B. Erdman's Publishing in Grand Rapids. And they come from a Reformed tradition, Reformed church tradition, but they published, I think is it 7 or 8 hardcover books? I never.
8.
There are 8? Yeah, and I don't know if that counts that one or not, because that was not hardcover. Mom collected this.
She did that after he passed away, didn't she?
She did. Actually, my dad had a bunch of us, friends and family, write down our favorite columns, and with stars besides the ones that were exceptionally favorite. And she drew from that, and that's what went in here. And a friend who, a summer resident of Bayview, paid. He said, I want some Cone books in print again, and he paid to have them published.
It's interesting. I did a search on Harold E. Cone, and you can find them on the internet for sale. I think someone out in New Mexico was talking about trying to buy a collection of his work.
Well, the Christian Herald family bookshelf had him as one of their authors. It was a book club, a Christian book club. So they did get all over the place. And actually, I could have brought it. There's a Chinese version of one of his books.
And you have a copy of that?
I have a copy of it.
Oh,
Yep.
my goodness.
It's
There's
all
also in
in.
Reader's Digest that went
Mm-hmm.
all over the world.
Yeah.
That's true. Yep. That one column, best things cannot be hurried, was in the 1956 Reader's Digest, I think it was.
Now, your mom was an English teacher.
Yes.
I have to ask, did she help him with his books?
She would sometimes proofread, and she typed a lot of, when he didn't have a secretary, she would type his columns.
Mm-hmm.
She did help like that. And I don't know, I don't remember whether she commented on different, grammar or anything. He didn't seem to have a lot of trouble with grammar.
Well, while we're talking about your mom, let's leave your dad just for a minute and go back and can you tell me a little bit about your mother and where she was born and grew up?
Well, she was born in Niles, Michigan, and when her father was a pastor in a church in that town. And she grew up various places that he was moved around. Traverse City was, I think, her favorite place that they lived. And he was the pastor of what became Emmanuel Evangelical Church, but that is now, I think, it's combined with
Methodist Church.
a Methodist church. And I don't know if anything's going on in that church or not, but she went through, I know she was through 7th grade in there. I think they moved just before her senior year to K-Pac. She was so mad. She said, "I'll never marry a minister."
And how did that turn out for her? Well, she graduated from high school young. She was 16, I believe. And then she went to the same college in Chicago.
North Central College in Naperville, Illinois.
And they met there.
They met there.
So tell us all about their romance.
Well, they got in trouble. My dad had a terrific sense of humor. They got in trouble in the library because my dad would he did this for me too, he'd make this little horse that would go along like this on things, and then if there was a glass of water or something, he'd get up on there and go Wah! On the top of the glass of water. He did that in the library, and they got tossed out of the library. Not permanently, but my mom babysat for her older brother's kids, and her older brother was my dad's psychology prof. And so I don't know that much about. I know they went to a Peer Gynt concert that was very meaningful, and they always would be remembered, and they'd always, when they played a record of Peer Gynt, they'd reminisce about that.
Where were they married?
They were married, I think, I don't really know what church. It's never been something that came up.
Did your grandfather marry them?
I don't.
The picture.
We have the picture. Doesn't show Grandpa. Doesn't show It shows my mom and my dad, my dad's older brother Al, and my mom's older sister Pauline in the picture, and a niece, was a flower girl.
So your mom never intended to marry a minister.
Right.
But what was her role as a minister's wife here in Charlotte?
Well, she, as I said, she did a lot of, she typed his columns. She was always in the choir, and she always participated in like the ladies' circles and that sort of thing.
Just good
And
alto.
she was very active in the churches that he was in. You know, not one that said that, well, she wasn't working until she started back to teaching here. When I was a freshman, she started back to teaching. She had not been teaching since I was really quite small.
I think 1955 maybe is when she started.
Yeah, the school year 55, 56, she
Freshman
started
year.
back. I was in her class, freshman English. Well, yeah, freshman English class was, yeah.
Very definitely. She, did she, you mentioned Lucy Martin and Dr. Martin, they
Yeah.
were friends in college?
They met in
Mhm.
college after Bob he moved to Sheboygan where some of the children were born.
Mhm.
And when he found out Cones were over here, they made an effort to move over here because they had been tight friends, you know, in college and remained so forever, you know.
Well, it's interesting that both of the women were teaching English in
Mhm.
Charlevoix at the same time.
Mm-hmm, yep. In high school, both in the high school.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had Lucy for speech.
So
Me
did I.
too.
Yeah.
So do you remember any stories, 60s?
Oh, well,
Plays were really important. Remember she and Lucy Martin did the plays.
I'm not sure how much Mom did with the plays, but she, oh, let's see. She was interested, I don't know, not too sure what all she did as far.
With her classes, I don't see her doing much extracurricular at all. She always had papers and she always
I think she might have been involved
did
with
them, you know, read every word.
everywhere, yes, everywhere we went during the school year, she had
Papers
her
were
little
there.
red briefcase full of papers to correct. She was connected with the National Honor Society, some I know.
Remember that?
Yep. She, and always was very interested in all of the literary and aspects of high school and the things that she. I think she taught upperclassmen later on after the beginning of the.
She also, she was a member, I know, of the Pilgrims Circle.
Yes, and the Women's Fellowship was the.
Right. And later, I think, didn't your father start a counseling service?
Well, what happened there? He had done a lot of counseling all through his ministry.
Mm-hmm.
He was very good at the psychology background helped a lot. He always had people coming to him that were troubled and in need. And when his health fell apart and he decided he was going to have to resign from the church because he couldn't get through a service without horrible headaches, he would end up lying on the table in the basement right after church and so on. They bought property down near the Looking Glass River down near Lansing, and we're going to build down there and sell everything up here. And the town of Charlevoix, all denominations, all people from all over town heard about it, and they formed a foundation called the Hidden Brook Foundation, which is the name that my folks had given this 40 acres they live on, that would pay for a secretary to keep his appointments so he organized, and to type for his columns so he could do his writing, and also be somebody at the house with his health situation being what it was, when Mom was at school teaching. So they hired Twyla Kaner was his secretary for a while, and Rosalind Goldstick was his secretary for a while.
Pauline Russell was,
Pauline did cleaned the house for us.
She did some
Yeah,
good things.
so, but and that if they would stay in town, and so they did. And that foundation, after my dad passed away, there was sort of a dearth of counseling, people that were counselors, and the CHIP Counseling Center formed. And CHIP, named after the Ransom's son, CHIP.
I remember that.
And Mom was on the board of the CHIP Counseling Center.
Now, that was for drugs and alcohol with teens? Was that the primary focus?
and adults.
And it was all kinds of counseling issues. And I think BASES sort of grew out of the youth end of that, you know, maybe the drugs and youth end of it, but.
A few years ago, a gentleman from Petoskey who was a
Preston Green?
Preston Green asked if he could use the name
Hidden Brook,
for his counseling business.
Hidden Brook Counseling.
Hidden Brook Counseling. And yes, it's Christian counseling, but not, churchy. But
So that's what we see
it's still in
advertised in
existence.
the newspaper.
It's still going.
Well, he said that the symbolism of the refreshing flow of the water and the whole idea of the hidden brook, he felt was helpful for the counseling center to have as a name.
Okay, now, this has been kind of serious, but can't you tell us some fun things about your folks and growing up and
Oh,
silly
land.
things?
Oh,
Everybody has those kind of things.
Oh,
You mean the great naturalist using a 22 on the squirrels on the bird feeder?
Yeah.
we have we had a bird feeder with holes in it all over that
One of his congregations in Chicago bought him a handgun
up here
up here. Bought him a handgun for a present.
for a birthday present. Actually, he used it in the ministry because when Eddie O'Neill's dad passed away, young,
Louis.
Yeah.
Louis, Daddy took Eddie out shooting at Hidden Brook and target practicing because he was having trouble, just having a really hard time.
He was 13, I think, when his dad passed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, my dad, the Kiwanis Club used to have a hobo luncheon party, and we have a picture of him. He put black cardboard over some of his teeth. He had this horrible hat all torn, his shredded pants on, and standing there.
He had a weird sense of humor.
Yeah.
Did he?
Oh, yeah. And a lot of cartoon books around.
Religious based?
No.
Just fun stuff.
No, we still have a
He
lot.
would have been a big Calvin and Hobbes fan,
Oh, okay.
all that kind of stuff, and Snoopy.
He always had a joke. He had a mental file that there was some joke under any subject matter up there, and he'd pull it out. And my mom would get giggling and always ended up with this funny little snort, which my kids always just loved that.
Did your kids know both of your parents? Or
Yes.
Did Dad pass?
No,
Jenny was 4, but she remembers him well.
yeah, Jenny, it was in Maine, and Tim,
okay.
Tim and Kevin. Tim was 12, yeah, and Kevin was about 10 or 11. There's a picture that I want to make a big one of, have one made of both of the boys are looking over what my dad's drawing on the drawing board.
Oh,
Yes, I want to. We found that picture again. We're gonna make them some enlargements of those. But he would say, come on over and see what you do so you don't make your colors run together and stuff like that. Well, we'd have a watercolor on the drawing board, and or come see this, or what would you like me to paint you a picture of? And he painted them. Kevin wanted one with a bunch of birds in it and a painted bunting, which didn't go with any of the other birds or the right kind of forest or anything, but Daddy stuck him in there. And Tim wanted a fox prowling and kind of creeping up on some rabbits. And it's a farm in the background, so they both got those pictures. They have them.
They have, yeah.
Very precious, yes.
Do you have something else that you want to show?
Well, let's see.
We can talk about that
Sure,
right
those two watercolors.
Well, these are a couple that we had prints made of. This one's we reduced quite a bit, but these were his black and white style kind of comes out too in the watercolors. These are two of the richer colored ones. There are some that are a little quieter colors, but that he had done. And you used to have to be careful about running into the bathroom and running your tub water in the morning because there might be watercolor paper sitting in there. Because he started watercoloring after not having done it for years in 1972. He couldn't sleep nights sometimes because he was having so much pain, and he'd get up and put the watercolor paper in the tub, get it wet, and then he'd start painting.
Some of this, a lot of the watercolors he did after he'd lost the sight in one eye to boot, so we figured that feeling of depth comes from one eye, and he really had a gift for it.
That's one of the things that people can't get over is how he was able to do all of the writing and all this with all this horrible pain
He didn't
from
sleep.
He had brain cancer, didn't
It ended up being cancer. It started out in 1955. He blacked out when we were driving home from Hiddenbrook to town, to the parsonage. And Dr. Saltonstall looked him over and said, I don't think this is a stroke, which is what we thought happened the first. There's something else going on here, and I'm going to transfer you to U of M hospital. And they found that he had a chordoma growing behind his sinuses, behind his eye, and that is a tumor type that's rare, and it's usually found at the base of the skull. And at that time it was inoperable. And his was up here, and they asked him if he'd been hit in the head by something at some point in his life. And he said, well, when I was a kid I ran into this big outdoor ice box playing tappy on the ice box and knocked myself out, head on. And that chordoma tissue is from the notochord that goes over the top of your head as an infant.
Usually goes away.
And usually much of that tissue disappears or is somehow absorbed or something. But it's apparently that they think that blow set that to growing, and very slow growing. But he had horrible headaches all my growing up. From the time I was tiny, he went to Mayo's Clinic when I was an infant to see what was going on, what was causing it. So in Ann Arbor, when they removed that in June of 1955, they said, well, I think we got it all, but these generally come back. So it didn't come back for 13 years, till 1968. And at that time, he was getting ready to speak in Bayview. After his retirement in '64, Bayview started asking him to preach in the summer, at least one summer, and usually the opening
And the
Cer-
psychology
opening
lectures.
weekend. And
And
yes,
psychology lectures at the Bayview. Someplace.
and he saw he was getting ready for that speaking engagement on that Sunday morning and looked in the mirror and said, "What in the world is going on with my forehead?" And it apparently had kind of ballooned out. And he preached anyway, but he said something's going on here, and he got an appointment in Ann Arbor, and they said, "Oh, yep, we knew it was going to come back, and we'll need to do surgery." And at that time, he wrote down for surgery and against surgery in his day book, and wrote, because he thought, you know, this is just, I may be incapacitated completely by this. And he wrote down all, but then he said, "No, I've got to do it. I've got to try."
Yeah.
And so he had the surgery that year, and there were still 5 more times before they said the last time, which would have been, I think, January of '74, that the tissue had gone over the line to chondrosarcoma, or bone cancer, and there was nothing they could do anymore.
And he passed away when he was 57, I believe.
Yes.
Think of what he accomplished in those years. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and his attitude, people would say, how can you be so happy? And with all this going on, and he would say, well, you know, if God had a scales and that he weighed your happiness on, or mine, I feel like I've been given much more happiness than most people have, and even with all of this going on. And so,
Attitude.
yeah.
Attitude is everything.
Just attitude.
Yeah.
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 Do you have anything else you'd like to say about your dad?
Oh,
Or
goodness.
your mother?
Well, my mom was just such a big help through all of it, all the time. I mean, every time he was in University Hospital, she would get time off from school and go down and stay in a room and on Ann Street, rent a little room, and she'd just be at the hospital all the time for him. Go out and get him shrimp or something if he was mad at the hospital food or couldn't stand it anymore, you know, 'cause all of those times down there.
Her mother had never traveled much at all. I don't think she had been much west of Chicago. But after Harold died, every family trip included Grandma, whether it was to Banff National Park in Canada or Florida or back and forth to my folks' when they lived in Colorado. She was always with us. She was family.
But she did say, one of the things she said, like Thoreau said, I've traveled widely in Concord.
Yeah.
She said, I've traveled widely in Charlevoix.
But she went to China and she went to Greece.
After she retired
a
in
lot with
'79.
Lucy. And she went to a parade in New York to protest against the Vietnam War.
It was a peace
It was a
rally.
peace rally.
Peace rally.
Yeah, she did.
Traveled on a bus with a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
But
Mark Durr, Lucy Martin, Portia Crawford, you know the names.
they were a bridge foursome.
Oh, yeah.
She also, she died suddenly, September 29th of 1988, with just having had a pacemaker put in, a temporary one, and was in the hospital in Petoskey to get a permanent one the following Monday, and this was a Friday. And we had managed that summer, at the time of her birthday in June for all 5 of us, including grown kids with jobs, one of them engaged, yep, and Larry's mom and dad. We met up in Montana and went on up to the Canadian Rockies with my mom along, all of us. And we were in this cruiser van, so we were really all together. And with some complaining fiancés and phone calls needing to go, but we managed that trip and not knowing what was coming in September at all, of course. And it just sort of felt like,
Treasure.
well, it was meant to happen. I mean,
We're
this,
making memories.
yep, we were,
Making
yep,
memories. And with your parents too? Your
yep,
parents?
all of us.
My mother and dad had such a good time because it was at a time when it was going to be Marion's birthday in Canada, 24th of June, and she was going to treat us all to steaks on the grill. Well, she went into the Canadian supermarket and steak was about $9 a pound in Canada. So we had nice big grilled burgers and steak. We had such a good time. My dad got such a kick out of that. Yeah, we had a good time.
Let's talk a little bit about your dad.
My dad's story starts in 1874, when his dad was born, in the middle of nowhere, Missouri, Norborn, Missouri. He was married at 44 to my grandmother, who was 20. They were married for 5 months, and they separated. My grandfather met my father when he was 21, when my father was 21, before the war. So it's a long time coming. Little history. He went to the CCC camps for the Civilian Conservation Corps in 1936. He and another young guy from North Dakota or South Dakota named Bob Brown had a double date with these two sisters. The sisters were only allowed to go out in pairs. And the two sisters saw these two skinny young guys coming down the road and said, "I'll take the one on the left and you can have the one on the right." Because they hadn't met them, blind date. Well, those two couples combined for about 125 years of marriage. My aunt and uncle and my mother and dad. My mother married my dad when she was 15. My dad was 20. That was in April of 1940. And then he wound up working in Springfield, Missouri for a while. I was born there in Springfield, Missouri about a year and a half later, in October of 41. And then Dad was concerned about the draft because the war was just getting going and he was still working. And so he enlisted in the Coast Guard and went to the East Coast, and then within a few months went to San Diego and went to the Pacific for about 18, 19 months until the war ended. And he was home for like 2 weeks in that whole time. And he was on an all Coast Guard crew attack transport, which is basically a Liberty ship with a couple of guns on it. And was in 9 major invasions, the nasty ones, Peleliu, Okinawa, the majors, Kwajalein. Successful military career. That ship only lost 1 man to an accident in the whole 18 months. Came home, must have been November of 45 when he mustered out. Had been in Seattle, and my mother and I had gotten to Seattle on a bus and were staying there until he got out, and then we moved back to Kansas. We're both from, my mother's from western Kansas, my dad from eastern Kansas. And he worked for about 2 years doing this and that. He had only a 10th grade education. He went with his younger brother on the back of a motorcycle 300 miles in one way so little brother could enlist. Well, they both came home on leave. And my mother's reaction was, she was very angry. But he assured her that they had promised him that he could, get this kind of duty, be in St. Louis, and she could join him in 6 weeks, and we did. St. Louis to New Orleans to Corpus Christi, Texas, to Grand Haven, Michigan, to Sheboygan, Michigan, to Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, and from Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, which was the home port of the Coast Guard cutter Sundew, in June of '58, it was shipped, the whole ship, kids and all, were shipped to Charlevoix. A lot of people in Sturgeon Bay were very unhappy because it had been a fixture there for a long time. And for me, it was high school number 5, coming up my senior year. It would be like moving now from Petoskey to Charlevoix. Big school system, lots of extras. At that time, Charlevoix was still a pretty basic school system. But it was a good town. Came here, got involved in playing ball in the summer with the kids that I knew, and wound up going out for football and not knowing a single girl in Charlevoix, which was not all bad, I suppose. But so as a senior, let's get this 1958 football thing straight. I was an inexperienced senior reserve, but I loved it. I played in 5 of the 8 games. Had a good time. It got to a point when the 5-6 games in, they had still not been scored on, so that became a big issue. So only those top like 13 or 14 kids played defense. Everybody else played offense. We had a good time. Had a great time. But
321 to
321 to nothing. Mr. Pierpoint from Harbor, we beat you guys 82 to. Well, the one year it was 88 to nothing. The next year I think it was 72. So, but no, we had a good time.
Wasn't it Harbor Springs that one of the young men ran the ball in for a supposed...
Actually, twice it happened that season. In the Grayling game here, I was playing defense. They completed a pass over the middle, and it went all the way in, but they were caught for clipping from behind, and that was called back. Well, no reserves played defense after that. No offense to anybody particular, but no, we had a very fine. And then there was the kid from Harbor Springs that went like 60 yards, and it was called back. Same reason. But no, it was a charm team. Nobody got hurt. Ken Wojin made All-State, the dream team All-State, and was recruited to Michigan State. Didn't play at State. Came home right away. He went into a situation where he was recruited into the same spot as a 6'6", 270-pound boy from Bay City Central, who later played in the NFL.
And you also had Dick Van Raphorst?
Dick Van Raphorst was a junior in that class. He was a place kicker. He had like 40, I want to say 45, 46 points kicking the ball his junior year. And the next year, they were also undefeated. I think it was 220-some to 19. The bookends on the 2 losses that started this streak and ended it were both Boyne City. Does that say something? Yeah, Boyne City was tough. Yeah, Rodney Ostrom likes to tell the story of meeting Carl Sharon head on. Carl Sharon basically left prints on him as he went by. he ran over. The junior class, the year before the '58 season, Sharon scored 6 touchdowns in that last game against Charlevoix. He played for the Boston in the AFL and was a player at Michigan State as well. Yeah, but no, it was a good time. Coast Guard. November 1958, we'd been in town since June. I've met my girlfriend at that point by then. She invited me to a party at the barber's daughter's house. And
Sadie Hawkins.
a Sadie Hawkins party from the old Little Abner cartoon kind of things. And that was October 1st, 1958. And in November, my dad had gotten home at, what was a Thursday night, maybe? I don't remember exactly. He'd just gotten off of duty at 5 and got home. Dinner was on the table. TV's saying there's reports of a ship in trouble on the Great Lakes. And the phone rings. And for obvious reasons, I can't repeat what he said. But anyway, he says, I'll see you when I see you. And that was 3 days before he got back home. After, they went out that night. And we have a lot of paperwork on this. My mother had a thick album that she wound up giving away to the daughter of one of the crewmen who drowned in that incident from Rogers City. So we have a lot less material than we used to, but we still have some. But there's a lot of good videos that were done after that by, they've shown them here at the Historical, at the library here. One was some film that was transposed from old movie film to video. And there's
Newsreel.
newsreel footage. There's some fabulous footage that was taken then. Pictures we had never seen before of my dad in action because it was all been on the deck. And they rescued the 2 men, and then they recovered the rest, and they recovered the bodies for the 27 more, 26 more.
Here in Charlotte, right?
Yes, yes, they did.
And how were they identified?
Family.
Did they,
Families were over here from Rogers City. There were like 87 children left without dads after that. I'm in Kiwanis, and I've been to Rogers City probably 5, 6 times in Kiwanis, and every time we get into this discussion about how many people are related to these fellows who were killed. We had just read recently that when the Cedarville was sunk several years later, a woman who had been married to a kid on the Bradley lost her second husband on the Cedarville. There were only two deaths on the Cedarville. It was rammed by another ship. So, yeah, it was a wild time. Dad got home and 3 days later, and, you know, there was him in national news. It was all over everything, you know. It was probably the biggest thing on the Great Lakes until Fitzgerald went down in the 70s.
well, they said the Carl B. Bradley was the largest self-unloading freighter.
Yeah, it was
on
also
the Great
empty.
Lakes.
It was
With
also
water.
empty.
It had water bells.
It had water ballast, but also it had been reported that it had some damage from rust on some areas, and they figured that that contributed to its breakup. Did you remember the lighter?
No.
Oh, I have. In one of the articles, they say that at the reception that was held for the families afterwards in the spring, the Coast Guard crews all got mementos from U.S. Steel, and what they basically were a Zippo lighter with the U.S. Steel emblem on it, and it's laying on my desk at home. I dug it out several months ago because we've been talking about when this first came up.
Well, the Sundew was a buoy tender, wasn't it?
The Sundew was a 180-foot buoy tender, one of about 5 on the Great Lakes at that point. But it had a unique thing about it in that it had twice the motor that the rest of the ships had, like the Acacia that was here, and the Woodbine in Grand Haven, and another one, Hollyhock. No, not the Hollyhock. That's a different kind of boat.
Had they ever had to go out and rescue anyone like that before?
Well, that's the Coast Guard's job.
I know.
When my father was in New Orleans, in 36 months in New Orleans, he was involved in recovering 36 bodies from different things. Lake Pontchartrain is a very shallow, nasty piece of water. It's like 20 feet deep and 20 miles long, and any little wave, and it turns into like a bathtub with your hand. Very dangerous.
Well, that was another thing that they said about Lake Michigan, wasn't it?
Lake
That
Michigan-
those waves that night came up so rapidly that,
One of the problems on that night is that the Sundew got forced into getting into the trough, parallel to the waves, so it was rocking like this. You know, they always try to face into the waves, but that boat was heeling up to almost 45 degrees. So the boat was like half over each time it would do that. And everything that had been on the deck and on the bulkheads down below were all over the place, you know, running. All the stuff in the kitchen was all over the place. All the stuff in the mess hall was all over the place.
They
Chairs.
tethered some of the men, didn't
Yeah,
they?
yes.
To the-
The men who were on deck had ropes around their waist, because if you had gone over the side, they'd have never found you. And my dad was on the deck the whole time out there. So he was, at that point, he wasn't a chief. He was I think he was a first-class boatswain mate, but he was the deck guy. You had an executive officer and a captain besides that up above.
so how big was the Sundew's crew when they
I think the crew was around 28, 32 in that ballpark. I was on the Sunday. I used to go down to the Sunday when I was in school, and the ship would be in, and we'd sit and drink coffee and swap lies. You know, the coasties, you know, sailors were sailors, And a lot of different, a lot of young people, a lot of young guys in the garden. My dad at that point would have been, oh, what was he? Pushing 40 years old. And a lot of the guys were 18, 19 years old. One of the guys that was here in town was on the Sunday the same time my dad was, but he was only 19. So, and my dad was 39 or 40. So, but no, it was a different time. And then they were only here in Charlevoix until June of 60. I went to college that fall of 59 in Traverse City, and my folks moved to Ludington in June of 60. And I had worked the summer of 59 here at the Parkside Dining Room, which is now where the band shell's at. And the next 2 summers I worked at the Upwith Assembly, which would be like the Chicago Club or Bayview in Ludington, which was where my dad was stationed. So, yeah, it was a different time. And then we were married before her senior year in September of 62. Senior year at University from up the road at Michigan State. So, yeah.
And then we get the next generation of the
Oh,
and
the
the
next generation, yeah.
The children and the grandchildren.
I like to tell that things were different then. I was raised in a mobile home because my folks had moved so much. And we had a little teeny mobile home when we got married. But by the time I graduated from Michigan State in 1965, which was 2 years